Hello, in this video I want to talk about some of the more advanced features of tests in iOS development. First off, let's consider hostless tests. Our tests till now have actually been run with the app, and if you were to run any particular test case, you would see the simulator launch and the app display, and then the test would be run within it. But some unit tests, especially, if they only require an instance of a single class, you don't need the host app to be running. And if that's when you're not using any UI components or anything. So we can set this up as a unit, as a hostless unit test target. And in this case, the host application, our app, doesn't run. And how we do this is basically we set up one of these host targets, these test targets, and under the testing thing, we just set the host application here to none. Note when you do this, because our app automatically takes every Swift file in our project and includes it, this won't be the case for this particular test target. So if you're testing the functionality of a particular class, you need to open that Swift file, and in the identity inspector under target membership, you'll have to check the box to add it to the particular test target. We'll see an example of that in the workshop. One of the other things you'll frequently need to do is test asynchronous code. So the difficulty with asynchronous code is you set it going, like when we call the resume method of a data task for a URL session. But then once resume has been called, it does some work in the background. It finishes later, and we usually have a completion handler. But how do we deal with this in a test case? Because all of our test cases, if they don't hit one of the assertions and fail on assertion, they're considered to have successfully passed. And if we resume a data task and then exit the test method and it thinks it's passed, that's not going to be correct. So what do? We use what's called an Xcode test expectation, and this waits for the asynchronous task to finish. You create an instance of this as so. Let expectation equals Xcode test expectation. You give it a description. And then by virtue of having this in your test case, it'll wait when it finishes until one of two things happens. Either you call the fulfill method of the expectation instance. This is you letting it know that it succeeded. So this is something you could put in the completion handler. Or if any time it encounters Xcode test fail, this is like hitting an assertion and it causes the test case to fail. The final thing I want to talk about is UI testing, and this is quite interesting and I think quite fun. But what we often want to do is simulate the user interacting with the user interface and check that it behaves in the way we expect. So Xcode allows us a way to test the UI of an application, and it does this by recording interactions within the UI and then examining the properties of UI objects. And we have a particular test target for UI tests, and within this we can run and record interactions with our app's UI. So you can set it recording, do some interactions, and it will generate code for you. And like with the previous tests, it uses the app itself, and it will launch the app in the simulator, and you'll see the kind of playback of interactions happen, but they can be very fast. You can find more information on the Xcode application framework here, and you can see exactly how you interact with it. So in terms of the UI test recording, how we do this is we have a test case, like test example here. We put our cursor within it and we can click the record button. When we click it, the app is going to launch in the simulator and you can interact with it. as you interact with it, it's going to generate code within this method. Um, you will encounter some issues with it, and you often need to tweak it and correct bits and pieces. We'll see this for sure when we have a look at it in the workshop. And once we've done this, you can obviously execute the test, and it will play back. And as before with earlier tests, you want to make sure these tests are simple, and ideally you're testing small bits of functionality at once. Also because if you change the UI, the way this works, it makes use of things like accessibility identifiers and identifiers of UI elements. So the actual location on the screen doesn't matter. If you move or change the constraints of something, your test cases will still work. But if you add or remove or change the name of particular elements in your view hierarchy, then some of these test cases will need to be updated and corrected. And that's pretty common with test cases, but you want to minimize any extra work that you have to do there. Yeah, so as I said, this UI test can click buttons, it can enter values into fields, either by clicking individual keys on the keypad or adding text directly to them. And then we can write assertions and check that UI elements have the values we expect them to, or particular views are visible, all that sort of stuff. So as an example, and this is something we'll do in the workshop, we might have a method that testing method that clicks a button, the action from which alters some text and changes the accessibility label, and then we can assert that it was altered, and we can check that. Okay, thanks for watching.